Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. And today, we've got a really interesting conversation with Ryan Wilson. And Ryan, I'm going to try to do justice to your background because it's pretty extensive. So if I make any mistakes, please let me know. But you're currently the CRO at Generis, and I'm going to have you explain a little bit more about your role there and what you do. But you are really well awarded. I mean, like 6 different revenue excellence awards. You've been part of, Deloitte's Fast 500. You've had all kinds of accolades in terms of also being part of like 2 exit strategies, right? And preparing the company for not only the growth that leads up to that, but the transition there. So your background from a CRO's perspective in a B2B organization deploying ABM, it's fantastic. And that's exactly what we're all about here on the podcast. So I'd also love to say that you're a big auto and motorcycle enthusiast. Also, at the same time, you love your cat, right? You're a big animal lover, and we all have pets at home, and it's a big part of who we are. I would love to give you, before we dive in, a chance to expand on that background a little bit, because we're going to start talking about like the hard truth about how you scale revenue organizations and have the kind of successes that you've had. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about your background before we do that.
Sure. Thanks, Steve, for having me on the show. So, yeah, as you said, my name is Ryan. So, I'm currently CRO here at Generis. We're a global B2B events organizer operating in both North America and Europe. I joined the company in August of 2023, where I've spent the last 2, 3 years basically getting the company to where it is today. We've almost quadrupled the size of the revenue in the business over the last few years. We've won a few awards, as you touched on for revenue excellence from the Globe and Mail, in fiscal 24 and 25, and then from the Financial Times in 2025 as one of the top growing companies in the Americas. What we do fundamentally is bring buyers and sellers together in structured networking events, 2 days of very intense, focused networking and one-to-one meetings. Really what attracted me to this role was the opportunity to deploy a lot of what learned in 10 years of working in software and technology businesses and in consulting into an environment that maybe was not as tech enabled and didn't have as much of the playbook in place that we see in a lot of software as a service businesses. So that was a really exciting opportunity. And that's part of the reason why I came to Generis. And I think the results speak for themselves. But I'm really very interested in any conversation that revolves around how we can take a playbook or take the systems that we have seen work as it comes to growing and scaling revenue and apply them into unique and novel use cases. I think the technology world is one where there's a lot of conversations that happen around what the best practices are, but you don't see a lot of that same kind of knowledge sharing and open communication in other industries. So I think that's what's really exciting to me about working in the event space. But yeah, excited for this conversation today and about what I've seen it takes to build a humming and successful revenue engine, even if it's an industry that might be a little bit different.
After the fact that we're all drooling from like, 4xing revenue and things like that, let's get it because you've got some really great advice on some of the things that typically happen, the problems, the challenges we have in typical B2B ABM, go-to-market environments. And you started out by talking about what you thought was the messaging gap and why sometimes the strategy that we talk about internally, like it rarely meets the actual customers themselves and where they're at. So I'd love to hear what you think about that.
Yeah, well, I think every organization has an idea of what it wants to communicate out into the market, but quite often there's that delta that exists between what most organizations want to communicate and what actually gets communicated out to customers and prospects. And this can be in the form of messaging and positioning, or the way that sellers communicate and connect with prospects, or fail to do so. And I think a lot of it has to do with the way that we build the context around what our solution offers, how it's relevant to our customers. And what I found in essentially every organization that I've been a part of, especially over the last 5 years, the last two companies I've been a part of, where we were able to accelerate productivity and accelerate revenue, is that quite often there's this compendium of information that lives within specific individuals in the organization, quite often the founders. They have a deep experience and knowledge, which makes them uniquely qualified as founders within that industry to bring, a solution to market. There's quite often that problem founder fit, but how that then gets delivered down the food chain or communicated down the food chain towards your VP of sales or towards your VP of marketing, and then your frontline marketers, your frontline sellers, there is quite often a gap that occurs along the way. So I think it's the responsibility of any revenue leader, or even if you're like a functional leader, like a head of a department, like a VP of sales or a VP of marketing, to try and extract as much of that context and insight from the founder, get it down on paper, and then figure out how that can be communicated out to the prospect. And one example of this was at the company I was at previously, which was a boutique CRM solution, booking and scheduling platforms for boutique fitness and wellness. That those founders had a very deep understanding of the fitness and wellness market as former gym owners. And they had this great story about how they had worked very closely with the 800-pound gorilla in the segment. And then that 800-pound gorilla had not treated them so well as founders. And so that was the impetus for them to go out and start their own company. And to a certain extent, they had put this in like a letter that was on the website, but that letter was not being read by anyone. Like it's like the equivalent of a blog post. And so one of the things that we did when I joined the company, as I said, this letter and this story is great, but the sellers need to start telling that story. And so as soon as we turned that into a talk track and had the sellers weave it in to the sales process to establish some familiarity and demonstrate some empathy with what our prospects were experiencing in terms of working with their software providers, naturally the results improved. And we started seeing that customers became more engaged. They felt as though, wow, this company really understands my lived experience. And then that made them more open to sharing with us their pain points, which then allowed us to get closer with the customer and demonstrate how the solution could solve those problems. And it was a night and day difference in terms of the results that we were able to achieve simply by virtue of extracting the knowledge out of the founder's minds, getting it into the sales process in the way that we directly communicated with customers. So it's not that the messaging doesn't exist. It's always there. The context is there. It's about how do you get it in front of customers in a way that will actually affect the outcomes.
So much to unpack because what you went through so many steps that you did right there. And I want to back up just a minute. There was in this podcast, we've been very fortunate. The last 100 episodes with C-suite executives, we've asked them this question: what are your two greatest challenges for creating long-term sustainable growth? The number one by far applies directly to what you're saying. And they say internal alignment is their number one challenge. And what you did is you said, okay, not only do we have to bring everybody together and align behind this founder message, right? But you also, it's not just the message, but it has to be a message. And you said this loud and clear that makes the buyers feel like you get it. You understand my lived experience, like what I go through every day. You have empathy for what I do, right? There's an emotional connection is what I got out of as a big takeaway as well, right? And part of the translation of strategy into customer messaging is in B2B, we can lose that emotional component very quickly, right? And I just wanted to ask, like, in all your experience and successes here, that emotional component of letting a buyer understand you get their pain points, how important is that component of everything you talked about there?
It's probably the most important thing in a sales motion, right? Like people buy on emotion and justify on logic, right? So your ability to connect as a seller and as an organization with the emotional and lived experience of your buyer is the reason why you win. people talk a lot about like and trust, but I think the sellers in 2026 and beyond have to think way beyond like and trust. Like, I don't really even care if you like me or if you feel as though I'm your favorite person to talk to, as long as I'm establishing credibility. I think credibility is more important than likability. I don't need an invitation to the cookout. What I need is for you to feel as though I know what you're going through. I've been in your shoes, and I'm a credible expert that can help you to find a better way to solve that problem that you're experiencing. And that comes down to a tactical empathy that you develop through storytelling, that you develop through, having, asking the right questions, paraphrasing, active listening, showing that you're really paying attention to what people are telling you, and getting your buyer into a state where they feel as though, you know, this person that I'm talking to gets it. Because when they feel you get it, that's when they open up. And then that's when they become more interested in working with you to solve their problem. And I say that at the micro level, but these are also things that we can be doing at the macro level as an organization with the power of storytelling in our marketing copy, in our video content, in our interviews that we do even with new hires, to show people that we are very committed towards understanding the needs of our buyers and then working very closely with them to get them the outcomes that they're looking for.
Now, one of many things you said there was it gives you a platform, that credibility, that belief, that empathy to then talk as the trusted, like the expert, right? Or what like a Gartner would say, like the trusted advisor, right? Now, more and more and more these days, there's a trend to this B2B self-service buying journey, right? They want to wait longer and longer and longer to want to talk to a salesperson. Nobody wants to be sold to. We want to have a conversation where I'm going to learn, where you are the expert. You're framing opportunities. You're bringing new education, right? And in the world of AI, where everybody has like literally you can go on for 10 minutes before on a Claude or a chat GPT, right? And learn what you never had before at your fingertips, right? Like what is the key today to being that expert and assuming that role credibly?
So this might be an unpopular opinion. Look, I believe in the power of AI, and I think that AI is definitely going to transform the way that we work. But I don't believe that buyers don't want to talk to salespeople. I think what buyers don't want is to feel like they are being feature dumped and that they're being pitched without any desire to learn about my problems, to understand how, my experience might be different from all of your other customers. I think in a sea of very, uh, you know, spammy messaging or content that is kind of one size fits all, people crave authenticity. I think that's what we're missing today in a lot of the interactions that people have. Like, we live in a world in 2026 that feels very shallow and vapid. And a lot of the sales messaging that I receive, and I get crazy amount of emails and LinkedIn messages for people trying to pitch me and sell me because of my role. It's all kind of cut and paste. I've had people call me, that don't have any understanding of what we do as a business. And it's very clear that they're just reading a script that, they repeat 100 times over with every single prospect that they call every single day with no differentiation or personalization. That doesn't work anymore. You have to understand who your buyer is. You have to have a desire to get closer to them and to, you know, really peel back the layers of the onion. And so one of the things that I preach to my team here is that it's not enough to simply understand, let's say, what industry your customer operates in, or, even who their customer is. You have to go deeper than that. Like, what's their strategy? What are they trying to accomplish in the next 12 to 18 months? What are their pain points? What have they tried before? Right. And the more that we take the time to get to know our customers, the better we are as sellers and the better we are as a revenue organization, because there's a wealth of information that we can take from every one of these interactions that we have with our prospects. And, I think that's part of the reason why tools like, Gong exist, for example, is to take all this wealth of information and aggregate it so that this week we can pull out the customer insights and figure out, okay, where the sweet spots are and how we can adapt our messaging. But how many organizations are really doing that? And how many organizations are evolving their messaging over time? Or do you do this once and then just run with that for the next 5 years? I think the way that we talk to the market has to consistently evolve. And every year I'm, taking a look at what's changed, for our customers and trying to pull out the insights to continuously optimize how we're positioning into that market and how we're communicating with customers on the macro and the micro level in order to have them feel that sense of authenticity that, hey, these guys really care about my business.
So here's what I took away is you never stop learning about your customers from what you just said, right? And you never stop iterating then how do you serve those customers? There was a great study McKinsey did, and they said even though all the benefits of ideation and innovation that come out with understanding the voice of the customer, less than 15% of organizations actually execute well on a voice of the customer program. So to your point, most companies don't do it, right? Like we love familiarity. We love thinking we get it, we understand it. Let's build and let's just repeat, right? The playbook, right? The playbook is almost a dirty word these days, right? So much is changing in the market from every single direction. Forrester, they had a study in 2024. It was a customer obsession study, and they determined that less than 3% of companies are customer obsessed. Less than 3%. Yet 100% of us would say we're customer obsessed, right? I mean, like 100% of us. Nobody would say we're not. And so that's what I want to delve into because it's uh it's a rarity. What you're saying is very rare in the market to have that kind of a devotion and dedication to truly understanding our customers. And so how do you, if you're translating that into a scalable revenue engine, right? Like it can't be just you that has this philosophy, right? It can't be you that's the entire engine behind the company, right? You have to train the entire organization to do that. What's the secret sauce? Like how do you help the organization become customer obsessed and therefore achieve the kind of accomplishments that you have?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it starts at the highest levels of the organization. I mean, everybody in the ELT needs to be aligned around this idea that feedback is a gift, and that if we're going to be the absolute best, uh, you know, if we're going to be the best offering in our market, then we have to take the feedback, the good, the bad, and apply it, right? It's one thing to take feedback, it's another thing to do something with it. And, this is something that I think we're pretty strong at here at Generis. It's something that, I know I'm certainly aligned with the rest of the C-suite on. And it's also something that we've propagated down through the heads of department and through, the managers, the directors, the salespeople, and the marketers and the folks in operations, is that when we receive feedback from customers, it's about what we do with it. So I think one of the things that we're quite strong at here at Generis, and something that I'm quite proud of, is the fact that we have regular reviews where we talk through, what went well, what maybe didn't go so well, with each and every, event that we run. We're constantly reviewing calls that we've had and emails that we exchange with customers to try and pick out the key learnings, identify the trends, and then we move on. And it's about understanding that the business doesn't improve if we don't take action to make it so. Like every business is really just a bunch of people that are in the business, right? And so, yeah, sometimes it's going to feel like you're herding cats, but ultimately, like, that's what it takes. And we have to establish what the priorities are. Typically, the way that I do this is at the outset of the year. I'll establish as part of our sales kickoff what the revenue leadership team's priorities are. And many of those priorities will incorporate elements of customer feedback. And then that gets communicated out through everybody in our org. And then we do the same thing at the half year mark. And we, talk about the progress that we made on those priorities and then reset on what those priorities are for the second half of the year. And then of course there's other, projects that we're working on in parallel that are not necessarily simply owned by the revenue org, but they're pain points that have been raised multiple times by our customers or that we've experienced from our end that it's like, okay, we have to jump on these and we have to solve them. But I think it really boils down to culture. Ultimately, if we're going to take the inputs that the customers give us and then, do something with them, there has to be a tight feedback loop and a willingness to tackle the hard problems. And I think most organizations struggle with being very reactive. And it's just a reality that a lot of organizations struggle to finally break free from, but you never break free from it unless you give yourself space to ideate on how to break free from it. Right. So a lot of organizations and leaders that I've talked to say, I just got so much on my plate that I don't have time to figure out how to solve this, that, or the other. And it's like, well, you have to make time. And when you make time, when you give yourself 30 minutes or an hour to sit down and look at, okay, what is this problem that we keep running into? And you sit down with some colleagues and say, okay, how does your team get affected by this? What suggestions do we have? What ideas do we have? There's often almost 99.9% of the time, there's a solution that can be implemented that will solve this. And it's usually not as big a lift as you think, but it requires that collaboration to happen. So, we try and bring, our heads of department together once a month to talk through these things. We, have regular meetings with, the revenue team to sit down and talk about some of the challenges that we're experiencing. And it's all cultural. It's about a willingness to embrace the hard problems, to recognize that if we can solve for these like real pain in the ass type issues that are needling and that continue to slow us down in these individual areas, we can tackle bigger problems over time that allow the business to move forward in leaps and bounds without the constant thorn in your side type issues, which a lot of organizations get dragged down by, simply from inertia.
I want to ask you and put you on the spot and say, like, you started out by like feedback is a gift. And we don't always look for it. We don't always act on it. And we can ignore a lot of the feedback that we get because it's like to your point, it's not good or it sounds really difficult, right? So how important, like if you were just to say today, I'm just gonna go with what we know, right? I'm gonna existing pain points in our clients and how we service them, and we're gonna refine our processes to deliver on what we know today. What kind of a competitive position would that put you a year from now, in your point of view, in terms of just like I'm trying to get at how important that feedback, that customer input to then the entire organization, the delivery of value that you create in the organization. Like less than 3% of companies are customer obsessed. Like there's a lot of companies out there that are just like, you double down on what you know right now, right? And you're not really open to new insights and feedback, right? So if you stopped and from your point of view, you started acting like maybe the more traditional program, right? Or company or go to market model, what does that do to your ability to be successful a year from now?
I think that we would stop being as effective as we are. I think that it would tank the type of growth that we've been able to achieve because everything that we do and all of the success I think that we've had in the last few years here, and that I've, been able to be a part of in the last, 5, 6 years of my career has all boiled down to constant iteration. I firmly believe that good enough is not good enough. I think Michael Jordan had a quote, like, I didn't come here to be average. It was either Michael Jordan or LeBron or Kobe or one of those guys, but like, I didn't come here to be average. I came here to be the absolute best at what I do. And that just requires a different level of, uh, of commitment. And the way that I think about it is that our customers are the reason why we show up every day. If we're not doing this for them, like what are we doing it for? I understand many people, you know, go to work, because they're just trying to pay their bills and whatnot. But if you're an executive, if you're a founder, you have to be operating on the level that your customers are the reason why you have all of the amazing things that you probably have in your life and the opportunities that you have in your career. And so if you're not constantly trying to figure out how you can better service your customers, you're not thinking big enough. Like when I joined Generis and then I talked to, the co-founders about where they wanted to take this thing, they were very clear that, our goal was to turn this into $100 million a year company. And we're on our way. And I think part of the reason we've been so successful is because even now, we look back on where we started, about 2.5 years ago when I joined the business versus where we are now. And I talked to some of our leaders who are still here today, who remember what that version of the organization looked like a few years ago. They're like, it's night and day. It's like a completely different company. And it's like, cool. So now where are we going to be another 2 years from now? Like, how much further can we take this? And we're constantly looking for ways to optimize the way that we train our people to make sure that they're more effective communicators. We're looking at ways that we can improve our customer experience in terms of delivering our product. We're looking at ways that we can level up in terms of our messaging and our branding and our imagery. And we're looking at ways that we can improve, delivery of our product and the experience that people have in working with our team. Like, there's a myriad number of things that can be optimized. And no, you can't do everything at once. But that's where your ability as an executive to prioritize what are the small wins that we can focus on right now. That's your role, because there's a concept called the aggregation of marginal gains. And if you look at the history behind this concept, there's a great story around a team. I think it was the Sky team in the UK that was, riding their cycling team for the Tour de France. And, they basically they were one of the worst performing teams. And, they had a new coach come in that said, look, we're going to focus on the aggregation of marginal gains and trying to optimize for all of these little things that we can do to improve the overall result. And it was things like, making sure that each team member, had the right pillow so that they could sleep better. It was things like making sure that, all of their diets were optimized for their individual nutritional needs. It was making sure that their flights were booked at the right time so that they weren't experiencing jet lag. It was making sure that, they had the right type of shoes that were fitting correctly when they're on the bikes, and that, their massages were focusing on specific muscle groups at specific times, and all of these tiny little changes that they made. And they had this goal that, if we implement all of these small little changes, maybe we can win the Tour de France in 5 years. Well, what they found is that by implementing all of these small little changes and rigorously following through to make sure that they were all kept, they actually won the Tour de France in 3 years. Right. And it was just a byproduct of saying, like, good enough is not good enough. Let's find every little thing that we can improve. And we're not going to get everything out of the gate, but we'll just keep building and building and building and building until such time that success is inevitable. And that's the way that I think about why you have to be so focused on not just messaging, but customer experience and the way that your team operates, and try and optimize every facet of your business if you want to be the best at what you do. If you're okay with being middle of the pack, or if you're okay with just getting 2 to 3% revenue growth year over year on the basis of annual price increase, you don't need to do any of this stuff. But if you want 30, 40, 50, 100% revenue growth year over year, you got to show up and put in the work.
Oh, I love this. I wish we could go on for like another 2 hours, but I have one last question, because we've covered so much territory here that I'm really interested in what, like, for the C-suite executives who are going to be consuming this conversation, if there was one thing that you wanted them to take away from the conversation today, what would that one thing be?
Nothing changes if you don't change, right? If you're leading the organization and you're stuck in the status quo and you accept the status quo, then nothing will change. Leadership means leading. Leadership means taking ownership for the outcome, even when taking ownership may not feel like it's 100% your responsibility. Like, for example, there's a lot of teams here that, let's say on our product team, I don't necessarily directly have responsibility for that team. They don't report into me. But at the same time, that product that we bring to the market impacts how well my sales team can operate and how well we market the event. So I am integrated in to their process, and I'm working very closely with that team on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to understand what are your pain points. How can we make your team more effective? How can I support you in terms of growing and developing and elevating the way that you run your little part of the business? Because if that team is operating at the highest level, then my sales team is going to operate at the highest level because our product is second to none. You have to take on more than what you feel is necessarily within your job description, because if you want to be the best, that's what the best do. They don't draw a little fence around their duties and say, well, that's not in my job description. No, they get their hands dirty and they say, okay, how can I help? How can I be additive and supportive in elevating the organization as a whole?
I think about your Kobe Bryant or Michael Jordan analogy, right? To be average and be way above average, you have to have a team around you, right? To win the championship, it can't just be a Michael Jordan, right? There's been plenty of teams that have a Michael, not everybody has Michael Jordan, but as a star, right? But it takes the team, right? And working with the team. I love that. It's the mission of this whole podcast is to bring different perspectives, unique insights, lived experiences that you've gone through and what works and what doesn't. If we can share it from all kinds of different, C-suite perspectives from, leaders all over the world, then we all gain. It's the rising tide that lifts all boats. And you were an amazing part of that rising tide today. And I just wanted to say thanks for coming on, Ryan.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me.